I was the prime suspect when my fiancée vanished 1 week before our wedding. I thought love had buried me for good. And then last Christmas, she knocked on my door with a grown man who looked so much like me it made my knees go weak. Hey there, folks. It's Ray Bennett from Mind Blowing Stories. Before I get into this one, I want to say something that makes my old heart a little heavy. 96% of you who watch these videos aren't subscribed. I know that number because I look at it, and every time I do, it stings. If you like hearing a retired mailman tell the truth about the messes he's made and the miracles he's seen, please hit subscribe. Tap like if you're feeling generous, and leave a comment when we're done. I read everyone, even the ones that tell me I talk too slow. All right. Deep breath. Let me take you back to 1979, to a storm, a girl with rain in her eyelashes, and a promise I didn't know would take 40 years to keep. I was 22, working nights at a holiday gas station on the south side of Terre Haute, Indiana. We had those old metal pumps that clunked when you flipped the lever. The sign out by the road was missing the O, so it read H. Lyday. Didn't matter. Folks came anyway, because I stocked the good coffee, and the day manager, Mr. Frederick, let me keep the place open past midnight if a storm was blowing through. And that night, Lord, the sky was a bruise. The kind of purple where your headlights make little tunnels, and the Wabash looks like muscle under skin. She pulled in driving a sun-faded red Nova with a trash bag taped over the back driver's window. I remember thinking I could see the song coming off her shoulders. She had that look the one people have when they've just left somewhere important. She eased up to pump 2, and I jogged out with the squeegee before she could reach for the nozzle. She rolled the window down, and cold rain smacked her cheek. She wiped it with the edge of her sleeve, and I saw a little scar by the corner of her mouth, a pale comma. Her hair was dark and pinned back with 2 silver barrettes that looked like teardrops. "Regular's fine," she said, voice like she always had a laugh in her pocket. "Sorry about the bag." The glass shattered when my sister's cat had a fit and ricocheted off the dining room chair. I told her not to worry. I pumped her gas, washed her windshield like I was polishing glass for a church service, and then she asked where the ladies' room was. I tried to prepare her, because our restroom had that damp towel smell every gas station back then had, but she went anyway. When she came back, I saw she'd been crying, not glistening crying. Whatever had been keeping her brave had slipped, and the storm had found the crack. I didn't ask. I said, "We got hot coffee and warm cherry pie inside." I said it the way you say, "I have oxygen." I don't know why I added, "on the house," except there is a certain look people get when they're down to the last hinge. She showed me that look, and I answered it. She smiled a little and followed me in. I poured the coffee and cut the pie and turned on the little radio behind the cigarettes. Patsy Cline had faded out, and the DJ was huffing about tornado watches. She sat on a stool and cupped her hands around the mug like it was winter, even though it was late June. "I'm Lucy," she said. "Ray," I said. "You from around here?" "Crawford County," she shrugged. "But I'm on the move. You?" "Terre Haute, born and raised. Don't hold it against me." She smiled. We ate pie. We talked about nothing and everything. She told me her sister Beth taught 3rd grade and did crosswords with a pen. I told her I could rebuild a carburetor blindfolded but couldn't cook eggs without turning them gray. She said she used to sing at the Melody Tap on Thursdays, until the owner tried to make her wear a sequined dress she described as an insult to fabric. I told her, my cousin Denny swore the catfish down by the 3rd bend of the Wabash could bark. The storm eased like some big hand had lifted. She stood up to go, and I don't know what made me say it, but I did. "Listen," I said, "it's late. There's a motel on Poplar that'll rent for $30 a night, but you could save that and sleep in the back office. I got a cot, door locks from the inside, and I'm on shift till 6. She studied me like she was measuring if I was a good risk. "You always take care of strangers?" she asked. "Only when they're braver than me," I said. She did stay. She pushed the cot up under the window unit and let it beat cold air on her face, and told me about a man named Ronnie who had long fingers and a temper like bad whiskey. She said she was done with him. She was done with the people he knew, their parties full of parlor tricks and lies. I didn't push. I went about my business and checked on her once around 3. She was asleep, one hand under her cheek. I stood there longer than I should have, memorizing. When dawn cracked and the first faint blue backed everything, she came out to the front and I made us eggs that didn't turn gray, and we ate them with ketchup, because that's what there was. She asked if I wanted to hear her sing. I said always. She said not now. She said Thursday, if I was brave, come to the tap. I was so brave I could barely stand still. That Thursday, I stood by the jukebox in a shirt I ironed 3 times with the good towel, and watched Lucy walk on stage in a plain black dress and a red ribbon around her wrist. No sequins. She sang Angel from Montgomery, like she'd found the ache where the song was built and couldn't help but open it. She saw me by the 3rd verse and her mouth did that tiny comma smile again. When she came down, I had a beer ready and a promise I didn't even know I was making. We left at closing and sat on the hood of my beige Buick, the streetlight cutting our shadows in half. She told me she wanted to get to Chicago, maybe even Nashville someday. But she was also tired. It's like I'm trying to outrun something that's somehow always a step behind, she said. Maybe stop running, I said, and it sounded dumb when it came out. She laughed, not mean. If I stop, it catches me, she said. But I'll tell you something. Right now, with you, I'm resting. We got rest together for 8 months. That's the simple part. And when I talk about it now, my breath goes a little out of time. We built a world the size of a rented apartment up on Sycamore, above an old coin shop. A world of 2 mugs and 3 forks, and a stereo that tried its best. I'd do my shift, and she'd do odd hours at the library. And on Thursdays, she sang. On Sundays, we'd drive to the covered bridge on County Road 300 and split a bologna sandwich, and look down into that green-tinted water and count the flip of fish. When fall came, we layered sweaters from Goodwill and made soup so salty it felt like the ocean was supposed to come with it. We had little fights about laundry and bigger ones when she flinched at every pickup truck that took the corner too fast. She told me a little more about Ronnie Howe. He ran errands for a man named Sal, who had a garage that fixed things too well. You get my meaning. I don't think I'm special, she said. I just know what I've seen. And boys with powerful friends don't take kindly to losing their favorite toy. I'm not a boy, I said. I know, she said, kissing the scar at the base of my thumb where I'd slipped with a box cutter as a teen. That's why I'm still here. On a snow day late in February of 1980, when the town went quiet like it had lost a dare, I asked her to marry me with a ring I bought from the coin shop owner down below. It wasn't much. Second-hand diamond, thin gold band, the kind of ring that means more because it's already survived somebody's story. She said yes so fast, it knocked me back. Then she cried, and I did too, and we pressed our foreheads together until we forgot where mine ended and hers began. We picked June for the wedding because June is the only month in Indiana that makes you forget how tough the others are. I should have known happy. Like that draws heat. The ex's name started showing up again. We got hang-up calls that were nothing but breathing. And once there was a dead bird on our welcome mat that made Lucy go into the bathroom and lock the door and sing under her breath for half an hour, like she was pushing back the world with a song. I told her we should call the cops. She said, "Ray, you don't know the tangle." I thought I did. I didn't. A week before the wedding, my cousin Denny dragged me to the Blue Lantern. Open mic, he said. Lucy should play. I was wary. The lantern was a half step rougher than the tap, and the men there were the kind who looked at a girl and saw what they could take. But we went because she wanted to practice playing standing up, said it helped her nerves. It was bright and loud and smelled like fried fish and cheap soap. She sang 2 songs and killed them dead, and was halfway through Boulder to Birmingham when I saw him. I didn't know his face, but I knew his fingers, long and elegant, and he tapped them on the bar like a metronome. He watched Lucy like a hunter, tracking a deer across a white field. He came up after all, "Lucy, baby, sweetheart," and she stiffened so hard I thought her bones would break. "You don't get to call me that," she said, quiet. He smiled in that way mean boys do, like you'd already lost something you hadn't even noticed falling. He looked at me and said, "You her fiancé, bless your heart," like he was from Carolina and not Illinois. He called himself Ronnie because he wanted credit for the ghost he'd become in our house. I told him to leave. He leaned in close, like he was going to ask me for the time, and said, "Talk to Sal, last chance." Then he licked 2 fingers, like he was putting out a candle, and tapped them twice on the engagement ring. I swatted his hand away. He laughed like he'd found something he'd been poking around for. Denny being Denny took a swing. It landed sloppy on Ronnie's shoulder, and the bouncer had us outside before I could think to grab Lucy's guitar. The cold air slapped the alcohol out of me. Lucy was shaking. I wrapped my coat around her, told her it was okay. She said no, like a prayer and a warning. She said, "You don't know what he just said in not so many words." Nah, the next morning she was gone. Her guitar leaned against the couch, and her blue sweater was folded on the back of the chair, and the coffee was cold in the pot because I'd slept through the alarm. On the kitchen table, her ring sat right where my plate should have been. Under it, a note. It was 5 words. "Don't look for me, please." I walked the apartment like there was a corner I hadn't checked that would put everything back. I went to the covered bridge. I went to the tap. I called her sister Beth, who hung up on me once and then, when I called again, said, "I told her to run," like I was a disease. I went to the Blue Lantern to ask if anyone had seen Ronnie. The bartender shrugged like he'd just shrugged last week about a different broken thing. I went to the police by afternoon because I wanted to be the man who did the right thing before there was a right thing to do. The first detective I spoke to was a man named Harlan Chase, who had the kind of face that made kids believe Santa was possible, and grown men tell the truth by accident. He took the report. He asked if we'd fought. I said not like that. He asked about other men. I said one. He asked me for Ronnie's last name. I didn't know it. He asked me to take off my shirt. There were scratches on my chest from moving Lucy's bookshelf 2 days before. He wrote that down like it was a sermon. He asked for my truck keys. The way he took them told me I had moved from guy whose fiancé is missing to guy everybody thinks did it. A day later, Lucy's Nova was found at the boat ramp down by the Wabash. The keys were in the ignition. There was a grocery list in the ashtray that said coffee, onions, butter, ribbon. There were no signs of a struggle, and the tow truck guys joked too fast because they didn't want to feel what they were feeling. They searched the river twice, then 3 times. The volunteer firemen stood around with their hands on their hips, doing what men do when they can't save something. My mother brought me a casserole and set it down without looking at me full on. For months, I was that man, the one who goes to buy bread and finds people studying him in the reflection of the display case. I kept Harlan's card in my wallet so I could flash it like an ID that said, "Not a killer." The case didn't close, but it ceased to be new. New things came. Bad winter. Layoffs. Beth changed churches. Denny moved to Indianapolis. On paper, my life kept going, and inside, it went sideways. I was angry at Lucy for leaving me with a ring-shaped hole and a town that loved to whisper. I was then angry at myself for being angry, because who was I to begrudge a woman's safety? I would fall asleep on the couch and wake up reaching for a sweater that wasn't there. The twist came the next spring across an oak table in Harlan's office. "You didn't hear this from me," he said. "And you can't do a damn thing about it, but I believe she's alive." I sat so still I could feel the blood behind my eyes. "Alive," I said, but it came out like I'd put too much weight on the word. He clicked his pen closed. He said some phrases I took years to fully understand. Witness protection, federal case, interstate theft ring, testifying. He said the names Ronnie and Sal like they were heavy, and he couldn't carry them anymore. He said, "I can't prove it to you. They came in quiet. We don't even officially know. But if she's where I think she is, she can't contact you. If you love her, let her go." I stood up and then sat back down because my legs weren't interested in what the rest of me wanted. "Beth," I said, "did Beth know?" He looked at his desk. He said nothing. I went home and put her ring back in the little velvet box from the coin shop and slid it into the zippered compartment of my old Army surplus duffel. I whispered, "Okay," and it was the hardest thing I've said that nobody heard. Years happened. That's a sentence you don't really understand until you wake up one day and the calendar says, "You've been carrying something forever." I became a mailman because, even with all my shame about people looking at me, I like seeing doors, and I like leaving something good in front of them. I got a route that had porches full of swing sets and gardeners, and an old man who would wave at every truck. I met a woman named Karen, who came into the post office looking for a package with her aunt's quilting fabric and left me with an ache I recognized. She had warm eyes and shoulders that looked like they'd carried a family before and could do it again. We built a life that was calm and honest. We had a daughter, Abby, and a son, Mark. The scars of another life didn't disappear. They just learned how to coexist with the breakfast dishes and the homework and the midnights with fever. I told Karen about Lucy before we married. I didn't keep ghosts in closets. Karen listened, smiled soft. "You don't love people in sequence," she said. "You love them in layers. I can handle layers." She could, and she did. She taught third grade like Beth. I used to watch her tie shoelaces and think the world had been improved by me keeping my head down and doing something kind. When the internet came and made any rumor immortal, sometimes I'd search for Lucy in the early mornings, barely breathing, typing her first name into a form like the letters were quicker than they actually were. Nothing, nothing, nothing. On nights when the spring peepers sang too loud and the house felt like a book I'd read 10 times, I'd go down to the basement and unzip the duffel and slide the ring box open, just enough to remind myself that the life I hadn't lived had still had weight. Then I'd shut it quick like a kid sneaking cookies and go upstairs and pour milk and make Karen laugh and fall asleep with my hand in hers. When you love people for real, you don't keep tally, but you do keep time. Karen got sick at the end of 2016. And the thing about cancer is, it is as impolite as a thief. It doesn't knock. It takes plates and hands and afternoons, and if you let it, your kindness. We didn't let it. We had 9 months where we told every story twice and ate cake for breakfast on Tuesdays because why not, and let the dog sleep on the bed and cried when we needed to. She died in September with her head on my shoulder and her mouth half open, like she was going to correct my grammar. I didn't know how to do so many things without her that I learned the hard way you can either not learn or you can break and mend. I did both. Abby brought me casseroles that weren't casseroles. Mark called every Sunday. I retired the next spring. And then, out of the blue, because my daughter is pushy when she loves you, I started this channel. Mind-blowing stories. It started as me telling Abby's kids the story about the time a raccoon stole my lunch and the school bus driver who had a pet snake. But stories grow into other stories like ivy if you let them. I learned that if I put a camera on a tripod and sat at my kitchen table and told the truth without fancy lighting, people would listen. A man wrote to say he played my videos for his wife in hospice because my voice calmed her. A woman asked me to record her father's life from his notes because she couldn't bear to hear him tell it. A kid sent me a recipe for peanut butter brownies that work every time. And then one day, I told the truth about the night at the gas station about Lucy, but I told it without her last name and without the dangerous details, because even after all the years, I didn't want any old wolf to wake up thinking he had business with her. It took about a month for the next part to happen, and when it did, it happened like the earth had been sliding the whole time, and I just hadn't noticed. I got an email with a subject line that read, "Hello, from a stranger who looks like you." Inside, just 2 paragraphs. My name is Cal. I'm 39. My mother says I should not contact you yet, that it might feel like a punch. But she also said she's never been brave enough to give you what you gave her. I took a home DNA test 2 years ago because my wife Rachel wanted to see if we had any Vikings in the family. And the matches were a mess until last week, when your nephew Denny Jr. popped up and messaged me and said my cheekbones looked like this old photograph of you, and that he was sorry if this was a wrong tree branch. The last line read, "I think you might be my father." I didn't tell anyone at first. I printed the email and put it in the ring box with the diamond, and I walked to the covered bridge and stared at the place in the creek where the water splits around a rock like an idea. Then I went home and wrote back 2 sentences. If your mother is Lucy Monroe, I believe you. And even if she isn't, I want to know you, he wrote back fast. When you wait your whole life to ask a question, the answer comes like a door you didn't know was already unlocked. He sent a picture. His hairline is mine. His brows, too. His eyes are Lucy's, that soft dark that makes you think of lantern light. He told me he was a high school music teacher in Arizona, married 10 years, 2 children who force him to be happier than he thought possible. He said he'd grown up in Nebraska with a man named Alan, who he called Dad without quotation marks, because that's what the man was. Alan, he wrote, had been the best kind of regular. Scout leader, lawn mower, reader of bedtime stories. He died 4 years ago of a heart attack on a treadmill at the Y. The ache in that sentence was clean. Cal said his mother wanted to write me first. He asked if he could give her my address. I said yes and then folded the letter into something smaller and smaller until it felt like a bullet I could swallow. 3 days later, my doorbell rang. December light is mean in Indiana. It comes in shallow, like an apology. I opened the door and there stood my ghost, a woman my age with Lucy's mouth and Lucy's stance and hair, now silver at the temples. And beside her stood a man who could have used my passport and not gotten caught. She said my name so soft the cold got embarrassed and stepped back. "Ray," she said. I didn't cry right away. I smiled like an idiot. Then I cried the way you do when you're too old to pretend you don't. We stood in my entry like that until my knees reminded me they are not what they once were. And I said, come in, for God's sake," and took their coats and made coffee and put out the plate of Christmas cookies my neighbor had brought that were baked too long but iced with the cutest little holly leaves. Lucy apologized 3 times before she sat down. Then she folded her hands and took a breath and told me everything I had prepared myself to hear and still was not ready for. That night after the Blue Lantern, she went to Beth's. Beth had been waiting with a bag and a phone number on a torn envelope. I opened the door and there was a man in a brown suit with a face that looked like he cooked his own breakfast, Lucy said. He said my name like he was reading it off, a list of people he wished he didn't have to protect. He said Ronnie had been picked up on a stolen car charge that morning. but had cut a deal pointing up, and I was one of the things he was pointing to. He said if I wanted to live long enough to get married someday, I should come with him. I said I was getting married in a week. He said I could write a note and leave a ring. She looked at me to make sure I didn't hate her. I didn't. I hated the world for keeping her choices so narrow you could measure them with a church ruler. She went with the marshal. She said Beth had known this might happen. Harlan had too. He was decent to me, Lucy said. He said if he could tell you, he would. He said his hands were tied. Later, I learned they were handcuffed behind his back. They took her to St. Louis first, then to a place outside Omaha, and then farther tiny towns where everything looked like summer stock sets, and nobody knew the old name she brought with her in the lining of her coat. She cut her hair and didn't sing for months. She threw up for weeks. She thought it was nerves and grief of a flavor so strong it came with its own color. It was a baby. She said the marshal looked like a man who thought he wasn't supposed to smile and let himself once anyway. It wasn't a choice I had to think about, she said. I kept him. They gave me a new last name, and I chose Monroe again when they said I could pick anything. I needed something of myself. When he was born, I thought I had ruined his life before it began. Moms think like that, did you know? She asked, and I said I did, because I had watched Karen worry like a profession. But then I looked at him, and he looked like his father, and he cried like a song starting up, and I decided I would spend the rest of my life making sure he knew he had come from love. She testified the next year, in a room with wood paneling, and a man who used words like he had a gun tucked in each of them. She told the truth about the cars, about the papers, about the man who told her she'd never sing again unless he said so. She was 23 and shaking and fierce. She said she thought of me standing next to a gas pump with my hair doing that thing it did in humidity. And she made her voice steady. There were threats. There were coded letters delivered to charities that had to be burned. The ring got sewn into a Bible she pretended to read too loudly as a joke to herself. And when it was done years later, after appeal, after a retrial where someone tried to make her into a story instead of a person, she could have come back, but she didn't. That was the second twist, and in some ways, the one that hurt most. I had a baby who thought Nebraska was the whole earth, she said, and I was married by then. Alan was good. He knew about you because I told him I couldn't love him right if he didn't know. He said, well, then we carry him with us. And he meant it. The safest thing for a long time was to let sleeping monsters sleep. I watched the news every time I thought I saw a reflection of a shadow. I kept your ring in a coffee can on a shelf in the pantry between the flour and the sugar like a talisman. Beth and I wrote letters we never sent to each other and hid them in library books like teenagers. And I stalked you in the only polite ways I knew, which meant none at all. I'd call the gas station and hang up when I heard your voice, just to know it was still there. I went to the covered bridge one August and stood there for 20 minutes and left when I heard footsteps that weren't yours. We cried a little more. Cal put his hand on his mother's back and rubbed circles like he had been born, knowing how to calm her. He said, I knew from the beginning I had a different story. Mom told me from the jump that the man who made me had brown eyes and a laugh I'd know if I heard it. She told me your name when I turned 18. She said I could do with it what I wanted. I wanted to protect her more than I wanted to meet you. Then Dad died, and the grief changed shape, and I realized I was allowed a second father without having to take anything from the first. We sat until the coffee went cold, freshened it, and sat more. They showed me pictures. Cal at 7 missing front tooth, clutching a recorder. Lucy on a porch with Alan, a man with a face you'd entrust with your paychecks. A grainy photo of a courtroom where Lucy sits, back straight as wire. I showed them my kids, my grandkids, Karen with flour on her cheek. At some point, I realized I was breathing like my lungs had grown a new room. We made a plan the way survivors do. We would take it slow. We would meet again in 2 days, this time with Abby and Mark and their families if they wanted. We would go to the covered bridge together because sometimes the past turns into a landmark and you have to stand inside it and say you made it. And because the past kept wanting another turn at bat, another twist rolled in from a place I had not expected. A week later, a woman rang my doorbell. She had a manila envelope. She looked like the kind of person who handled paperwork for a living and liked it. "Mr. Bennett," she said, "my name is Claire Chase. My father was Detective Harlan Chase. He passed in October. I'm sorry to come like this, but he left an envelope for you, and it took me a bit to find your correct address. He asked me to hand deliver." There it was. The name like a key, sliding back into a door after 40 years. I invited her in. She sat and drank iced tea, because that's what I had. She told me her father had carried certain files all the way to his retirement, and then kept the memory of them the way a man keeps a pocket knife, even after the blade won't open. He had felt conflicted about so many things he hadn't been allowed to say to me. "He had a lot of respect for your fiancée," Claire said. "He used to say she had more courage than a whole precinct." I opened the envelope. Inside was my ring, the one from the coin shop, wrapped in a paper towel and then again in a page, torn from a legal pad, where Harlan had written in blocky letters, "I promised her I'd hold this until I could give it to you. It took too long. I'm sorry." He'd drawn a little square at the corner like he'd been thinking. There was also a picture tucked in. It was Lucy and me from the tap, probably taken the night we met. I don't know how he had it. Maybe someone gave it to him after she disappeared. Maybe he took it off the bulletin board with the weekly specials on it and kept it in his desk to remind himself of the line between what you think is true and what you can prove. The world got very quiet around me. I sat there holding the ring and thinking how a circle is the dumbest and smartest shape we have. We went to the covered bridge that weekend. Abby had made muffins that shed crumbs like a dog sheds hair. Mark brought a thermos of coffee and the sort of joke he uses to keep himself from crying. Cal drove, and his kids tumbled out of the back seat, dressed like the weather had been told to be nice. Lucy wore a denim jacket, I remembered, and new boots. We stood in the shade of that old wood and watched the creek slide past the way it always does, indifferent and faithful. I said a small thank you to whoever designs the days. Lucy handed me the ring. "Keep it," she said, and then added quick because she knows me. "Not as a symbol of what we didn't get, as a monument to what we survived. We did what we had to do. We were so young, Ray." I told her I would keep it. Then I gave her something back. In the ring box, under the velvet, I had kept the folded note she left me. It had worn thin at the creases. I had taped it once with careful strips. I gave it to her. She held it like she was afraid it would turn to powder and blow away. Then she laughed, and I looked down. She had written 3 extra words in the corner, so faint you could barely see them unless you knew where to look. "I love you." She'd written it for me like she hoped someday I'd learn how to notice what was trying to save me. We walked and talked and didn't force what didn't need forcing. That's something age gives you if you're lucky. We did not pretend the years were a dress we could put on and look the same as we did before. We let the years be the years, and we said thank you to them for doing most of the heavy lifting. There were no grand gestures, no last-minute wedding under an oak tree. There were pies and photographs, and the comfortable way people stand together when they have permission to be themselves. When we hugged goodbye, we used both arms and didn't hide how long we needed to hold on. In the months that followed, my life didn't explode into some new arrangement. It folded out like one of those card tables you keep in the garage until holidays. Cal called me once a week to tell me about a student who finally played his trombone without sounding like a moose in distress. He sent me videos of his daughter playing soccer and his boy with a Lego ship so serious it looked seaworthy. Abby learned how to say Cal without tripping over the way it fit into the world. Mark invited them to Thanksgiving and burned the rolls just like his mother used to do, because traditions come in all kinds. Beth wrote me a letter that was 4 pages of apology and 4 more of explanation. She said she hated me because it was easier than hating the way life had done her sister wrong. I wrote back and said there are worse things than being hated for the wrong reasons and loved for the right ones. As for Lucy, we found a lane we could walk. She comes by on Tuesdays sometimes, and we watch old musicals and argue about which song deserves to be famous. She brings me tomatoes from her brother-in-law's garden, and I give her jars of jam I bought and pretended I made until she laughed too loud to let me keep lying. Once we went back to the tap because I wanted to see how much of it the years had scraped off. It's a sports bar now, full of flat screens and young men with tight beards. The jukebox is a touch screen. I stood by it anyway because some habits you keep. She sang for me at my kitchen table instead, voice lower but truer, and she cried when she finished. Not because the song was sad, but because she'd found a place where it could land. People ask me the same questions because people are built to wonder. Do I wish things had gone another way? Of course. Do I feel cheated? On Sundays when my coffee runs out and the dog next door won't stop barking, sure. Do I want to marry her now? No, not like that. We had a love that had to break to keep us alive. That doesn't make it smaller. In some way, it keeps it from being made into something cheap by trying to make it serve a shape it can't. I keep the ring in the box on the shelf in my office. Sometimes I take it down and think of how small a circle is, how many times it can go around, and how it never stops pretending it isn't just a line trying to get back to itself. I ran into Claire a few months after she brought me the envelope. She said her father used to sit on the porch and watch storms roll in across the soybean fields, and say that sometimes a storm wasn't meant to punish anyone. Sometimes it was just the weather being the weather. I think about that when I wake up at 4 and the world feels like it is about to break. And I tell myself, fate isn't a judge with a gavel. It's more like one of those little wind-up toys that bumps into the wall and turns itself and keeps going. Maybe one day it bumps into the right wall, and that's enough. And because life is determined to add footnotes, even when you think it's done writing the page, there was one more twist, small but sweet. I got a package from the coin shop owner's daughter, a woman my age I'd hardly known 40 years ago. Inside was a cheap little tape recorder with a scotch tape note that read, "Found this in the back room marked for trash." I pressed play. It was scratchy. A boy's voice on it, mine, trying to hum a guitar part to remember, and a girl's voice laughing and telling me not to speed up, that the song will get there when it gets there. Then the sound cut out. I sat in my kitchen and listened to that 6 times until the tape wore thin. I mailed it to Cal for safekeeping. He said he keeps it in his desk and plays it before he starts his first period class on the days the kids look like gray ghosts. He says it sets the tone. He says it says patience without saying it. If you've listened to me this long, thank you. I know some of you are sitting there with a name in your mouth and a hurt in your hands, and you're wondering if it will ever stop feeling like there's a second you in the room. It won't. But sometimes that second you picks up the other side of the couch and helps you move it. Sometimes he or she rings the doorbell at Christmas and walks in out of the cold and eats cookies that are baked too long and says the word that unlocks your chest. Before I let you go, I'm going to do the part I hate, but that I can't ignore. 96% of you are not subscribed. It makes this old fella a little sad, because telling stories into a void is something I did once for years, and I prefer faces. If this meant anything to you, If you tasted pie in your mouth or felt the Wabash wind on your face, please subscribe to Mind-Blowing Stories. Tap like so the little robots know I didn't waste your time. Drop a comment if you've got the courage, even if it's just one word, even if it's the name of a person you're not ready to explain. I'll be here next week with another one, God willing, and the creek not rising. Until then, take care of the people you can, forgive the people you can't, and keep a ring or a note or a tape that reminds you. Because sometimes what saves us doesn't look like a rescue when it arrives.